All right, so without further ado, we're going to bring up a fella who doesn't know how to drink coffee, as evidenced by what he did to his shirt. Mr. Troy Lehman of the Young Marrieds Group. I'd say we were friends, but we are. I like Troy. Troy's a good dude. He makes everything very awkward for me when we're together, so that's always fun, like right now. So because Troy knows how much I love touch so much, he bought me a shirt a long time ago that had print on it that just said, "If you can read this, you're too close." And it just looked like a regular print on the shirt, so that's how much he loves me. So, Troy Lehman, here you go.
Brandon Larson. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, guy. By the way, I want to just give a little love to both Brandon and Tiffany for all they do in this ministry. Can you guys give it up for them? They're amazing. I taught them everything they know, and they're crushing it. They're crushing it. One of the awkward things with Brandon, I got to say, is his voice, because I always make a big deal about how cool his voice is. Like, here I am, a pastor, and I sound like this. Okay? It's not like I've been sucking on helium for like the last 2 years of my life. And then Brandon's just got that amazing voice. It's like, hello. And I just want it so bad. I got 3 kids, 2 of which are boys. My youngest is 11. His voice sounds like mine. Poor kid. The genetic code, he got this. But my 14-year-old is like, hello. He's just got this deep voice. And I'm always like, I'm so jealous of your voice. So, all right. Well, it's good to be here with you guys. There's a big crowd here, and I think it's because of, I think you guys heard George was not going to be here today. So, and I work with George, so I'm planning on really having fun with George this week in my meeting and being like, hey, George, there was a lot of people there today, and you weren't there. So, so I'm gonna have a little fun with George. Love George. But, all right, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to turn to 2 places in your Bible, all right? I do not have the PowerPoint because I could not open it. George made it for me, and I could not open it. I am a complete idiot when it comes to technology. I'm an idiot in a lot of things, okay? That's one of my, I can't drink coffee. I can't do technology very well. So, but these are the 2 places I want you to turn to is Matthew 5 and 1 John 4. Matthew 5, 1 John 4. If you have a hard Bible, put a finger in each place. If you've got a digital Bible, just be ready to go to both of those places. I'll cue you in here in a few moments on that. But as Brandon said, name's Troy, married to my beautiful wife, Lisa. She's incredible. Some of you might know my wife, and if you do, you'll know that she's the better part, much wiser, she's just better with people than I am. I'm not all that great with people, but she's phenomenal. And we got 3 kids. I got a 21-year-old daughter, Arden, who's heading back to college here in a few actually next week. And then I got my 14-year-old son and my 11-year-old son. So I spend my time here at the church as a pastor. I pastor the Young Marrieds Ministry. I've done that the last 8, almost 9 years now. So I work with a lot of couples, and I love it, and I've loved it. So, and then I also work with just in general, like a lot of the ministries here. Since I've been here a really long, I've been a pastor here over 20 years. They just keep giving me more stuff, and I just keep taking it because I'm not smart enough to say no. So, I get to work with a lot of other ministries as well, which is really fun. This series that you guys are in is called Good News. I believe you're going through the Gospels and kind of, I'm guessing, highlighting particular passages and points in the Gospels. Am I correct on that so far? George told me all of this, and I took notes, but like I said, I'm not very smart, so I missed probably a lot of it. But that's exciting for you guys, and you're having these discussions. And he asked me this week to speak here in Matthew 5 on divorce and vows. Divorce and vows, which is not fun. So I'm actually not going to really speak very much on divorce, and there's a reason for it. You're gonna see why as I go through my teaching today. I'm actually going to speak more on marriage and the vows of marriage. Now, I know not everybody in here is married or engaged or right. I'm going to really speak from the angle of kind of kind of like if you're in this particular place, if you are thinking about marriage or you'd like to get married at some point or something like that, that's kind of the angle I'm going to approach this. Actually, a lot of what I'm going to share today is what I share with couples more on the pre-marriage side of things. So if you happen, I know there's a few in here that are married. If you are married, I think this will be a great reminder for you. If you are thinking about married or would like to get married, it's important, I think, that we have this conversation about marriage now because as we're going to see, it is the most significant relationship that you enter into here in this life that we have, that God has given us, right? We have our relationship with God, number one, and then number two is that marriage. And it's you're going to see why that's the case, why it's so closely connected into our relationship with God. And so does that sound good? And here we go. So let's go to Matthew 5. And I'm going to read verses 31 through 37, spend just a few seconds talking about it. Then we're going to go to 1 John 4. Here are the words of Jesus Christ, Matthew 5:31. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. And then Jesus says again in verse 33, again, you have heard it, that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, nor by God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your yes be yes, and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Okay, pause. This is in the series, right? So this is what we're going to talk about this for a second, but I really want to spend some more time in a different passage, actually. But in this section, you'll see, as you read it, chapter 5, Jesus says over and over again, he starts with this teaching of this particular section. He uses these words, you have heard that it was said. What is Jesus doing? And maybe George spoke on this already, so forgive me if he has, but he's basically addressing what is common, what they have heard, what they've accepted, what's kind of the common theme of culture, or he's even speaking specifically to those who are spiritual, right? So he's speaking to those who are experiencing and practicing religion, and he says that this is what you have heard that it has been said, but let me clarify this. Let me tell you what is really truth. So that's what he's doing. He's setting basically things that are in error. He's setting them back to what is true. And in this section, he talks about marriage and vows. And that the bottom line to both of these things that he's approaching here is that both of these things are binding. Marriage is a binding, committed relationship. We're going to see that here in a second. And then he's talking about our oaths. As we give oaths or vows or we make promises that we are to, those are binding, right? In other words, we don't want to go into these things in a haphazard way. In other words, there's no feelings connected to these things. It's like when you enter into marriage, when you enter into an oath, it's like there's no feelings per se. Now, you might really love someone, right? Or you might be really excited about a vow or an oath that you're going to make. But his whole point in all of this, Jesus' point in all of this is these things are binding. We're not to take these things lightly, right? And again, what is he addressing? Well, he's addressing a culture back then, which is pretty common to what it is today, in that we don't sometimes enter into those things with the weight of what that relationship is. Does that make sense? The oath, the vow. Sometimes we can live in a culture where it's like, hey, if things change, I can change, right? If I feel differently tomorrow, I can make a different decision based upon my feelings. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not the case when we talk about whether it's marriage or whether talking about vows or oaths in general. Not that these two passages are necessarily connected, as you'll see when you read through Matthew 5, but it just so happens that oaths and vows follow right underneath the section on marriage. It's saying that these things are indeed binding. Now, the reason why I don't really want to speak about divorce today, and I really, if I can use some of my own contextual clues when it comes to studying Scripture, right? I don't think Jesus really wanted to talk about divorce either. They wanted to talk about divorce, but Jesus didn't really care to talk about divorce. And the reason is that divorce is incompatible with God's design. Maybe that's something you need to write down right now. It's like divorce is not what God designed when it came to marriage. In fact, I work with a lot of couples, and I have worked with a lot of couples over the almost 9 years now in this particular ministry that I've led, served in, is there's several couples who will say this. They don't even use the word divorce. In fact, they'll say, we don't even bring up the word divorce. In fact, I was talking to one guy one time, we were counseling, talking through stuff, and he's like, the D word, and I'm thinking, the D word? I'm like, I'm going through all my cuss words, so what's it? And he's like, and I finally realized he was saying he would not utter the words divorce. It's almost like this was going to be something that was not going to be a part of their relationship whatsoever. In fact, they weren't even going to say the word divorce. Now, I've said it like a dozen times, but it's kind of pointless because what Jesus is teaching about, what the Bible teaches us, you can go back to Genesis, to become one flesh. What does the Genesis account say? A man shall be joined to his wife, shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Therefore, what God has brought together, let no man separate. So it's this idea of like, there is this union that is permanent. It's this permanent union. It's not meant to come apart. It's only meant to come apart at death. So in other words, for you to get out of a marriage is someone's got to die. Sounds dramatic, but it's true. It's like that's how it goes. My wife was a widow. She was in a marriage. Her husband died unexpectedly as a young man, and so now she's a free agent, right? And I swooped in and scored. Okay, that's what I did. I'm making it sound, I want to be very compassionate towards my wife. It was very hard for her, right? But that's how her marriage ended, was in death. It was a death that ended that vow and that oath. And now she's married to me, and as long as I'm alive, we're married, right? As long as she's alive, we're married. That's the approach. It's almost like this. Divorce is so incompatible with marriage. It's almost like a safe with a wrong combination. We have a safe in our garage where we got all of our documents, our marriage certificates, our kids' birth certificates, our bank information, our trust, our living trust that we have, so that our kids can get all $25 that we have in our account, right? I had the wrong combination. I mean, we needed a document. I'm in there for like 30 minutes trying to open this thing, and I'm like, babe, I cannot open the safe. And she's like, well, what numbers are you using? I can't even remember what it is right now, so it's not even helpful for you guys to break into my house and steal my document. And she told me the combination. I'm like, this is how this works. The right combination opens the safe, right? Divorce is incompatible with marriage. And that's just something that we need to understand right from the get-go. That's why I want to go now to 1 John 4. So I asked you to have your finger there, find it, 1 John 4, 7 through 11. If you're digital, I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. You guys are probably all pretty much younger than me, so you should be able to find it quicker than I do. But here's what John says in John 4, 7 through 11. Now he's talking about what true love looks like. This is that agape love, that God-centered love that is at the very core of marriage and our relation. As a believer, we are now called to love differently. It's a deeper kind of love. We can love at a different level because of Jesus Christ. And here's what he says, beloved, let us love one another. This is verse 7 of chapter 4. For love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this, the love of God was manifested towards us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the covenant of marriage. That's really what I want to talk about, not divorce. I want to talk about the covenant of marriage. Notice the words that I used. Marriage is a covenant. You might want to write that down. Marriage is a covenant relationship. And I will say this. You will not enter into any other covenant in your lifetime unless you adopt a child. It is the equivalent of adoption in our culture, okay? And what you can or will experience here in San Diego, California, okay, is adoption. What is that? It's a choosing. A covenant is a choosing. And so what John does here is he's telling believers like about God's love, and he's depicting the choosing love of the nature of Christ, right? And what does he say here? He says this: God loved us, sent his son Jesus, not because we were great, not because there was something lovable about us, not something that was attractive about us. The Bible's pretty clear on that. Like what depicts humanity is depravity. Okay, what does that mean? It means we are sinful, innately sinful. In my ministry, there's a lot of little kids around, and I'm just like, I look at that little kid. It looks so cute, that little bundle of fat, right? That little thing is a sinner, is what it is. Now, it has not sinned yet per se, but sin is in them, right? And if you've been a parent for, all it takes is as soon as the kid can start to have its own little brain, in terms of making decisions or will, you start to see that sin seep out, right? It is innate in every one of us. So God sent his son Jesus not because we were lovable. He sent him to us because out of his will, out of his goodwill, he came to love us. That is a covenant. That is what a covenant is. A covenant is a one-way vow to another. That is what a covenant is. You see in the Old Testament, right? God went and entered into these covenants with Abraham, with Noah, right? With his people. This covenantal understanding is very much a scriptural biblical understanding. It's God. It's directed by God towards one another. But John does something pretty revolutionary here. Is he says this. Now this is the way that we're supposed to love one another. Is we enter into these covenants of love with one another. Now, marriage is a formal covenant. That's what it is. It's a formal covenant with someone else. Now, I'm going to compare and contrast that with a contract. Okay? We, in Western civilization, we live in a contractual understanding. That's what we do. We do contracts all day long. Anybody here's job, is it contracts? I'm guessing some of you guys literally make money off of contracts. Actually, all of us to some degree probably make money off of a contract. And what is a contract? A contract it's an agreement between two people that as long as one person performs, the other will perform. That's how it works. It's like contractual understanding. It's like, for those of you who own a home, I completely dare you to stop paying your mortgage for a month or 2 or 3. No, don't do that. It's terrible advice, right? You don't pay your cell phone bill, what happens? They turn your phone off, right? Why? Because you stopped performing. You stopped delivering. Or work the other way around. If your garbage man stops picking up your trash, are you going to send in the next installment? No, you're not, right? Why? Because they stopped performing. That is a contractual understanding of a relationship. That is not what God designed for us, not only in marriage, but in all of our relationships as believers. Our understanding is that we are to love from a covenantal perspective and from a covenantal place. Now, I want to take this again into marriage. We live in a culture that is very pervasive when it comes to a contract, right? As I counsel couples and talk with couples all the time, inevitably it comes down to this. What I'm teaching you today, what I'm bringing up for discussion around the table is exactly what we're talking about today. It comes down to this. If you're going to encounter issues in your marriage or in your relationship, it's going to come down to this misunderstanding of the relationship. It's going to come down to people thinking it's a contract. Oh, my wife, she stopped performing a long time ago. Or my husband stopped performing in this particular way. So I have now stopped performing. Okay? You could call it whatever it is. They stopped loving me. They stopped doing this. They stopped providing for me. They stopped doing all these things. So now I'm at this place where I want to now bring up this topic of divorce or separation or whatever you want to call it, right? The breaking of the relationship. Now I'm at a place where I want to do that. And it's like, well, you guys are coming at it from the wrong perspective. This is not what God created. God did not create a contractual understanding of love. He created a covenantal understanding of love. It's so key, those two words. Why? Because God gave his son Jesus out of his goodwill. He entered into a covenant with people. Again, not because we were good, lovely, or desirable. He promised his grace despite our sin, our hang-ups, and our mishaps. That's what God did. And so even the fact that Jesus had to entertain this whole concept of divorce and it was based off of someone's sin is still not really at the heart of God. Like, God's heart isn't, oh, you sinned, this is over. right? That's not God's heart. God's heart is you sin, grace will cover it, right? You sinned, I will continue to love. That's the covenantal understanding of love. You see, sometimes we get into a contractual understanding of the love relationship even with Jesus. It's like, oh man, I went out and did whatever last night. I committed some big sin or I did something stupid. God no longer loves me, right? Or there's some sort of issue now that God has with me. Now, it is true that God abhors sin, he hates sin, he detests sin, but his love works through sin. He can still love us despite our sin. In other words, we can't, the unpardonable sin that we talk about in the New Testament, what is that? It's actually a rejection of grace. That's the thing that's going to be unpardonable. That's the thing. Once we reject Jesus and we say, I do not want to follow him. I understand the gospel. I do not believe, that is unpardonable, right? Or the fact that we don't have a relationship with Jesus, that's unpardonable. But this idea that somehow we can do something that's so big or so massive, even in a marriage, adultery, take adultery for instance, very wrecks marriages. Like it's hard. I've walked through this with a lot of people, adultery in marriage. That is still not necessarily means that the relationship should end. There's grace to be given. There's an extension of love towards one another. Why? Because this is the way that Jesus has loved us. He's loved us through adultery. If you commit adultery and you're married someday, guess what? Jesus will still love you. There is no breaking of love because of an act that you have committed. Does that make sense? Which allows us in 1 John 4 then to look at it this from a covenantal perspective. So that is the heart of what God has created when we talk about this agape, God kind of love that he has for us and then what we're now called to be to one another. Again, 1 John directs that now towards us. This is how we should love one another. Now, I want to go into vows because this is huge. And this is where I'm going to end, okay? And then just a few more thoughts and I'm going to be done. Am I doing okay on time? I got to hustle. Here we go. The traditional vows that you will share at your wedding goes something like this. I, husband, so I, Troy, take my wife, Lisa, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. As God is my witness, I give you my promise. What was the only condition that you heard in that whole vow, right? Does anybody want to throw it out there? Was there any conditions? What's that? Death. That's it. So one of us must die. and then this vow is over, okay? And I'm not saying go out and murder, okay? Now we run into another thing, okay? And that's a whole nother lesson for another time, okay? The one condition is death. You see how the vow supports the very word of God, sickness and health, right? Richer for poorer. All the things that you will encounter in marriage. You will encounter these things. We, even in our short time of marriage, compared to a lot of people, we have encountered several of those things that we vowed to one another. And yet, what do? We stay at it. We stay at this love, this covenant. Why? Because we said this to one another. Now, I oftentimes say this to couples at weddings, and I've done a few weddings. I did like Rachel's, wherever Rachel is. I think okay. I thought you saw that I was speaking, and you're like, peace out. I'm gonna go to brunch. But I tell this to couples all the time. Might have said it at Rachel's wedding. I was really sick. I think I had COVID. This was right before COVID. I was like, but, sorry, Rachel. Okay. That memory came back in my mind. Yeah. We made it through. We're good. Yeah. So I tell couples this. It just so happens that you got all dressed up and came to this cool party today to say these words to your spouse. It actually has nothing to do with your spouse, but it has everything to do with you. The covenant has everything to do with you and the Lord and the oath, right? Has nothing to do with the other person. Isn't that wild to think about? You showed up in that wedding dress. You're going to show up in that wedding dress and in that tuxedo, and you're going to say some words to this person across from you, and it really has nothing to do with how they act or respond as to how you're going to love them and continue to love them. That's the way you have to think about marriage. Does that make sense? That's what you're saying to them is that. Now, I understand there's this people are always like, well, come on, Troy, be real, be real. Like, how do you really love someone who doesn't want to be loved? Dude, great question. But that's what God does to us, and that's what he does to you. So go to Christ, learn the gospel, learn it again, and stay in it and grind. Like that is what marriage can be, right? Now, obviously, a healthy marriage, two people looking to experience covenantal love with one another, it's beautiful and it jives. But man, you've married for any length of time. This is just me being real. You're going to be tested. You're going to be tested with this, okay? I got 3 things for you, and then I'm going to shut up and pray, okay? And I'm going to let you talk. Here's some applicational steps for you whenever we talk about, I know I went from divorce to marriage to vows to covenant. Hopefully you're tracking along with what I'm saying, but I'm doing my best. Here's number 1. At this point and at this stage of your life, number 1, learn what covenantal love is. Learn what covenantal love is. Write this down. Learn it. School yourself on it. If you're going to become a student of anything, be a student of covenantal love. You need to immerse yourself in the gospel. That's the only way you're fully going to comprehend and understand what it's going to take in marriage to stay loving someone for the rest of your life and the rest of their life, right? You have to immerse yourself in the gospel. Here's number 2. Do not, all caps, do not get serious with anyone that is not clear on covenantal love. Do not get serious with this person if they're not clear on what covenantal love is. Because I know how this goes. Like, oh, they'll get it. They'll change a little bit. They're really cute. I'm really attracted. We have a lot of fun together. I've heard it all, okay, at this point. I really have. People got serious with somebody who was not clear on what covenantal love is. Now they're in a covenant relationship, and they don't even realize it. That's the trippiest part, is when I talk to people sometimes about their marriages like this, they're like, I didn't know this. I didn't understand this. Like, well, what did you think you said? What do you think you were doing when you stood up in front of all those people and you said these words? What did you think this was? They're like, well, I don't know. I'm like, oh my goodness, young person. Let's get schooled again on what covenantal love is. So do not even get serious with anyone. In fact, don't even flirt around with someone. Now, this is not probably the best topic for a first date, okay? Just warning you. You go on a first date, and you're like, okay, you do this, blue eyes, blah. What's your perspective on covenantal love? Okay, that'll be your last date, okay? For one and done. If you don't like the person, if you're like instantly in 10 minutes, like there's no connection here, just throw out the covenantal love discussion, they're gone, okay? So you can always put that in your back pocket. So do not get serious with anyone that's not clear on covenantal love, which would probably also mean that they're not a believer, right? If they don't understand covenantal love, they probably don't have a relationship with Jesus. In fact, I could say they don't have a relationship with Jesus. They just don't know it, okay? So this is why also the Bible calls us to be, joined with another believer in marriage, because if you don't, there is no such thing as covenantal love out there in culture. You're not going to find it. It's all contractual. It's all a bunch of people making business deals in a relationship, and it's not going to withstand. It's not going to hold up the test of time. So that's why we enter into relationships with believers. And here's the last thing I got. You need to teach this to your married friends. And you're like, well, I'm single. How do I teach this to your married friends? Here's the thing that happens in relationships. People talk. Everyone talks, right? You're going to talk to people who are not believers. You're going to talk to people who are married, and they're going to tell you about their marriage. Hey, how you doing? Oh, man, we're really struggling in our marriage. Oh, da, 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 da. And you're going to listen. You're like, yeah, that's pretty awful. They did that. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, my goodness, I can just see how you're so frustrated. But let me tell you something. Like, how do you respond to that, considering that you're in a covenant with that person? Right? You see, there's a lot of bad advice that people get in marriage. It's just true. Like I will correct, people all the time be like, well, my friend said that I should just leave him, or I should just leave her. This should be done. Terrible advice, maybe I'm like, okay, have we had the covenantal love conversation? Now, I understand there's caveats out there. There's abuse situations. There's things where it's life and death, okay? And those are other conversations for another time. That's most of the time I find that's not what surrounds fractured marriages. It really comes back down to this: covenantal love versus contractual, covenantal thinking versus contractual thinking in relationship. That's where most of them are. So that's why I'm going to talk to most of this. And again, as you talk to your married friends, even if you're single, you can bring in covenantal love. Why? Because it's scriptural. Go to 1 John 4. Okay, I understand this is hard in your marriage right now. Let's read 1 John 4 together, and then I want to hear your thoughts. And they're going to be like, okay. And you're going to see this like new type of thinking or returning to the gospel in their life and in their relationship together. All right. So teach this to your married friends. Sound good? That is all I got on whatever it was I was talking about: divorce, vows, marriage. We went down the rabbit trail to ending with covenantal love. So let me pray for you guys, and then I want to allow you guys to talk about this around your tables, and hopefully this stirs some good convo, okay? God, we thank you for your love for us.